In the beginning, before the names of kingdoms were carved into stone, and before the footsteps of mortals pressed meaning into the soil, the land itself breathed with a gentle longing. It was a longing older than memory, softer than the mist curling over the emerald hills, yet powerful enough to shape the destiny of all who wandered across it. This land, lush and humming with unseen life, was not merely earth and water. It was Ériu herself, the goddess whose very essence pulsed through every grain of soil. Her presence was felt in the silence between waves, in the rustle of oak leaves whispering ancient truths, and in the warmth rising from sunlit meadows. She was sovereignty made flesh, belonging woven into form, a goddess whose spirit held the delicate tension between welcome and mystery. Ériu did not reign from a distant heaven. She was here, close enough for mortals to sense her nearness, like the faint brush of a hand along the forearm, intimate, electric, undeniable. At dawn, when the sky blushed with the first hints of gold, Ériu's essence stirred in the soft breath of light that spread over the rolling hills. The landscape shifted, as if waking from a dream, colors deepening, shadows stretching, all infused with her presence. She was the curve of the horizon, the warmth beneath bare feet, the shimmering quiet of lakes reflecting skies that seemed too vast to name. Even those who lacked the language of myth felt her. They felt her in the sudden swell of emotion while standing alone in an open field, a feeling that rose without warning, tender and inexplicable, like remembering a touch they had never received yet somehow missed. Because Ériu watched, not as a distant deity, but as a lover observes the stirring of someone asleep beside them. Her awareness drifted across the lands she embodied, tender and yearning. She longed for connection, not worship born of fear, but recognition, a gaze that met her own, a touch that affirmed she was seen, understood, and desired. Her myth was not forged of conquest or thunderous battles. It was woven of intimacy, the quiet pull between the mortal and the divine, the desire to be known beyond titles and reverence. In ancient times, when druids walked pathways traced by stars and men spoke to rivers as though to kin, Ériu's presence was even more tangible. The veil between flesh and spirit thinned, and mortals could feel her breath in the air around them. They spoke of her as a queen, a mother, a lover of the land itself, but none of these names captured the totality of her being. For Ériu was not merely a figure in celestial stories. She was the heartbeat beneath the soil, steady and warm. She was the spirit of belonging, woven through the roots of oak and ash, humming within the veins of rivers. To stand upon her land was to stand within her embrace. Her sovereignty was not a crown upon her brow, but the natural authority of presence, the way a flame commands attention simply by existing. She did not demand loyalty, she inspired it. Those who felt her touch were moved not by duty, but by the irresistible sensation that to be close to Ériu was to be close to something profoundly alive, something that promised both comfort and awakening. There was a sensuality to the land she shaped, a tenderness that flowed through rivers and pooled in valleys. The curves of hills resembled the softness of a reclining body. The lush green fields seemed to breathe, rising and falling as though stirred by a silent sigh. Even the air held a warmth that hinted at an embrace waiting just beyond perception. To walk the land was to brush against her spirit, to feel her attention linger. And though mortals could not always name the sensation, they felt it deeply. A quiet pulse of yearning that called them to stay a little longer, breathe a little deeper, listen a little more closely. Ériu's myth begins not with an event, but with a feeling, a yearning woven into the land itself, a desire for harmony between her and the people who lived upon her body. She was not merely the guardian of Ireland. She was Ireland's very soul, shaped into form by the collective dreams, fears, and loves of her people. And as the ages shifted, as kingdoms rose and fell like tides, that desire remained. Her story endured because it was never just a story. It was an invitation to step into a world where the divine was not distant, where the land could feel, where connection was sacred, where longing was not a weakness but a path. For Ériu, longing was the language of existence. She longed for the gentle weight of recognition, for voices calling her name not in prayer alone, but in affection. She longed for the warmth of mortal presence, for the brush of footsteps across her soil, for hearts that beat with the same quiet fire as her own. In every myth told about her, this desire shimmered like hidden gold beneath the narrative. Her essence, though bound to the land, was not static. She moved in cycles, blooming and fading with the seasons. In spring, she felt youthful, her energy bright and playful, coaxing flowers from the earth. In summer, she was bold and radiant, her warmth lingering like a lover's hand. In autumn, she grew introspective, wrapping herself in shades of amber and copper. And in winter, she withdrew into a languid stillness, her breath slow, her touch cool as frost. Yet through every cycle, her longing remained, the steady, pulsing rhythm of her existence. This longing was the heart of her myth, the emotional current that guided every encounter between Ériu and those who dared to feel the world deeply. Mortals who sensed her presence often described it as an ache that settled in their chest, something tender, intimate, and a little overwhelming. It was the feeling of standing on the brink of understanding something vast and ancient, of almost touching the truth of the world, yet not quite. That almost was where Ériu lived, in the space between knowing and yearning. And so the myth begins, with a land that breathes, a goddess who longs, and a world where the boundaries between the mortal and the divine blur like morning mist. With Ériu waiting, watching, and reaching out with a presence as soft as moss beneath bare feet, yet as powerful as the rising tide. The myth begins with a promise that connection is sacred, that desire is a force of creation, and that to step upon her land is to step into her embrace. And in this gentle beginning, the tone of her story is set. It is not a tale of thunder or fire, but of breath and closeness,
of a goddess whose power lies in the way she makes the world feel alive beneath one's touch. To approach Ériu is to feel the hum of the earth resonate through one's bones, to sense the threads of belonging weaving around the heart. It is to become aware of every subtle shift in wind, every warm pulse beneath the soil, as though the land itself is listening. Thus the myth opens with intimacy woven into every leaf, every stone, every sigh of wind across the hills. It calls the listener inward, inviting them to surrender to the quiet pull of Ériu's presence. And as the story unfolds, this beginning becomes not just an introduction, but the first brush of a touch promising to awaken something long sleeping within the soul.
Ériu took form as dawn spilled its pale gold across the land, shaping herself from mist, warmth, and the pulse of the soil beneath. She emerged not as a distant celestial figure, but as a woman carrying the breath of Ireland within her bones. Her skin held the tones of fertile earth after spring rain. Her hair flowed like dark river water, and her eyes shimmered with shifting shades of green that seemed to echo every meadow, every moss-covered stone, every ancient forest still whispering the memories of the world's early hours. Her presence was soft, yet undeniably powerful, an invitation to draw near, to listen, to feel. But Ériu was not merely the land given shape. She was the longing woven through its essence. Her inner world lived in constant tension, a harmony built upon conflicting desires. She yearned to be touched, understood, and cherished, yet she feared the fragility that intimacy demanded. She carried within her the weight of sovereignty, a title that meant duty, endurance, and the eternal watching of mortal generations rise and fall like tides. Yet beneath that mantle was a heart that longed not to reign, but to be held, to be met as woman, not as a goddess. This duality shaped every breath she took. She moved with the calm assurance of ancient hills, yet felt emotions that trembled like young leaves caught in a sudden gust. Her desires were vast, stretching across time and earth, yet intimately human. The desire to share warmth, laughter, whispered truths that mortals kept only for those they trusted most. And beneath all these desires lay her greatest vulnerability, the fear that no one could truly see both sides of her and choose her entirely. It was this inner tension that shaped the path of those drawn into her story. For Ériu had a way of calling to hearts without speaking, a subtle stirring that awakened curiosity and longing. Among the countless souls who felt the pull of her presence, one figure stepped forward with a resonance that altered the rhythm of the land itself. His name was Aiden, a wanderer, a storyteller, and a man whose spirit carried the quiet fire of someone who had walked long paths in search of something he could not name. He was mortal, fragile in the way all mortals were, yet there was a steadiness in him that the world rarely gifted to human hearts.
Aiden did not seek glory or divine favor. He sought connection. He listened to rivers as if they held secrets worth learning. He traced the shapes of clouds with thoughtful eyes. When he stepped onto Ériu's land, he did so with reverence born not of fear, but of wonder. And it was this wonder that reached her, brushing against her consciousness like a gentle hand she had longed to feel. Where others saw the land as resource or territory, Aiden saw presence, warmth, intention. Without knowing why, he spoke softly when alone in the hills, as though addressing someone unseen. Ériu felt those words. Each one stirred something within her, a quiet flutter, a spark rising from embers she believed dormant. She watched him from the wind, from the rustling of leaves, from the shimmering surface of still water. The more she observed him, the more she felt a strange pull toward him, one that transcended her role as goddess. He awakened in her a desire to reveal herself, not in grandeur or radiant glory, but in intimacy, to show him the softness beneath her sovereignty, to let him understand the shape of her loneliness. But this attraction carried stakes that shook her spirit. To appear before a mortal in true form meant vulnerability. It meant offering part of her essence, allowing it to be touched, admired, or wounded. And Ériu had experienced the ache of centuries, the sting of betrayal from those who sought her power without understanding her heart. Aiden's presence awakened not only desire, but fear. The fear that he too might take without giving, might see the goddess but overlook the woman, might adore the land but never recognize the soul beneath it. Aiden, however, sensed none of her turmoil. He only knew that the land felt alive beneath his feet, that the wind carried a warmth that settled against his skin like breath, and that at times he felt watched in a way that was not threatening, but deeply intimate. He walked with a kind of grateful awe, whispering stories to the air, offering pieces of his heart without realizing anyone listened. This innocence was what drew Ériu closer, what tempted her to bridge the divide between them. Yet Ériu was not the only being whose presence shaped the unfolding tension. Among the ancient spirits woven through the land lived Fiacra, a guardian bound to Ériu's essence since the first stones rose from the sea. He was neither mortal nor god, but something in between, a spirit formed of wind, shadow, and memory. His purpose was singular, to protect Ériu from forces that might fracture her, whether mortal ambitions or cosmic threats. He had watched over her for ages, his loyalty unyielding, his bond with her deeper than words.
Fiacra sensed the shift long before Ériu acknowledged it. He felt the tremor in her presence, the warmth blooming through the soil, the softening that signaled vulnerability. When he observed Aiden walking the hills with his quiet smile and gentle voice, Fiacra saw not innocence but danger. The danger of attachment, of distraction, of Ériu giving too much of herself to someone who would inevitably perish. Mortals were brief, their love fleeting, their promises fragile. To Fiacra, Aiden was a spark that could ignite either profound transformation or devastating ruin. Ériu, aware of Fiacra's watchfulness, felt torn. She trusted him as she trusted the changing seasons, but his caution pressed against her longing, creating a tension within her that mirrored the tension surrounding the three of them. Fiacra knew her desires perhaps better than she knew them herself, and his presence, though protective,
reminded her of limits she long resented. His warnings echoed through her mind. Mortals bring beauty, but not forever. Desire ignites, but also consumes. Love is tender, but it leaves scars even gods cannot escape. Still, Aiden pulled her. His very existence awakened emotions Ériu believed were only remnants of ancient dreams. He stirred vulnerability, yes, but also hope. A quiet, fragile hope that perhaps she could be seen not only as the land, not only as the embodiment of sovereignty, but as a woman yearning to share her heart's warmth. He offered her the possibility of connection without expectation, affection without demand. And that possibility shimmered too brightly to ignore. As Ériu watched the delicate threads weaving between herself, Aiden, and Fiacre, she understood that these bonds would shape the unfolding of her myth. Aiden brought tenderness and curiosity, awakening desire. Fiacre brought caution and devotion, awakening conflict. She herself stood between them, land and woman, goddess and soul, pulled by longing, bound by duty, and trembling with the awareness that the path ahead promised both beauty and ache. And so the characters took their places within the story. Ériu, the sensual heart of the land, Aiden, the mortal whose spirit stirred her deepest desires, and Fiacre, the guardian whose devotion challenged the very longing she could no longer silence. Their intertwined destinies created a tension both emotional and sensual, the kind that promised to unravel secrets, ignite passions, and shape the course of the myth that was only just beginning.
Ériu felt the tension long before she understood its shape, a subtle tightening in the earth beneath her feet and a quickening in the winds that carried her breath across the land. It was a pull and a resistance, a longing blooming within her even as fear coiled around its edges. For centuries uncounted, she had been worshipped, feared, revered, and adored, but rarely, so painfully rarely, had she been seen. Mortals bowed their heads before her name, invoked her in rituals, and praised the fertile lands that bore her essence, yet none had touched the hidden softness inside her, the part that trembled with yearning. What she craved was not devotion, but intimacy, not offerings, but a gentle understanding, not prayers, but the warmth of a presence that did not flinch from her power. And this longing, quiet as dew at dawn, burned brighter each time she sensed Aiden nearby. His footsteps on her soil stirred something deep within her, something delicate and dangerously hopeful. He spoke to the land with tenderness, unaware that the land listened with a woman's heart. His stories, murmured into the wind or whispered to the quiet twilight, brushed against her like fingertips trailing down her spine. She felt seen in the spaces between his words, not as a goddess enthroned in myth, but as a living soul aching for closeness. Yet this desire ignited the very fear that kept her bound in solitude. For Ériu knew the fragility of mortal beings, their lives a brief spark, their promises vulnerable to time. She knew too well how mortals looked upon the divine,
with awe, with longing, with hunger, with fear. Few could stand before true sovereignty without trembling, and fewer still could touch it without losing themselves. The last thing she wanted was for Aidan to love her divinity while losing sight of her humanity. And yet, how could he approach her without confronting the overwhelming power that made her what she was? Her longing collided with her dread, creating a tension within her that radiated through the land like a fault line, preparing to fracture. Aidan felt it too, though he did not understand its source. When he walked the hills alone, a strange pull guided his steps, gentle yet insistent, as if invisible threads drew him toward a presence he could not name. At times, the air grew thick with warmth, brushing along his neck like a slow exhale. At others, a chill swept through him, not cold, but awakening, the kind of shiver one feels when standing at the threshold of something sacred. These sensations both called and unsettled him, stirring a yearning he did not know he carried, a yearning for something vast, ancient, and intimately near.
He admired the land deeply, but admiration slowly shifted into something else, something magnetic and unsettling. When he knelt by a stream, he found himself speaking softly, as if addressing someone listening just beyond the veil of sight. When the wind rose to touch his hair, he sometimes closed his eyes, imagining fingers smoothing through the strands. Desire crept upon him in quiet moments, curling around his thoughts, warm and persistent. And with that desire came fear, a fear not of harm, but of surrendering to something greater than himself, something he might never fully comprehend, yet could not resist. The conflict between longing and fear echoed within both Ériu and Aidan, like two melodies intertwining, creating a harmony neither had intended, yet could not break. But the tension did not exist between them alone. Fiacre felt it most acutely. Bound to Ériu's essence, he sensed each shift in her emotions like a tremor across the land. What stirred within her now set his spirit on edge. He could feel her reaching outward, stretching the boundaries she had held for centuries, drawn by the mortal whose gentle presence threw her world into disarray. To Fiacre, Aidan was a threat, not because he wished harm, but because he awakened desire, desire capable of unraveling Ériu's delicate balance between goddess and woman. Fiacre confronted her in the hush before dawn, when mist draped the hills and the world still slept. "You let him draw too near," he whispered, his voice woven from wind and shadow. "Mortals cannot bear the weight of your soul. You risk fractures you cannot mend." Ériu turned her gaze toward him, her form shimmering softly, blending with the morning light. "He sees me," she murmured, each word trembling with truth. "Not as the Druids see me, not as the legends speak of me, but with an openness that does not demand or fear."
Fiacre's expression twisted with worry and something deeper, something like unspoken devotion. He sees the land, and the land is you, but not all of you. If you reveal your heart, he may take it unknowingly, simply because mortals are fragile and cannot hold what you offer. Her voice softened, aching and resolute. And if I remain alone, untouched, unshared, what becomes of a goddess whose heart has forgotten how to beat?
This question silenced him, though tension still rippled through his form. And so the struggle deepened, Ériu caught between sovereignty and surrender, Aidan pulled between curiosity and fear, and Fiacre torn between protecting her and witnessing her yearning. The conflict built slowly, like heat beneath the earth before a volcanic bloom. Each moment between Ériu and Aidan intensified the tension, though Aidan still remained unaware of the full truth. When he walked through forests, the leaves rustled in patterns that whispered her voice. When he touched the bark of ancient oaks, warmth pulsed beneath his fingers, as if the tree leaned into his contact. At night, dreams came, not visions, but sensations. The press of soft earth beneath his palms, a presence curling around him, warm and watchful. He awoke breathless, pulse racing, yearning for something he could not name, yet could not deny. Ériu felt every moment of his yearning as though it were her own. The desires she had long kept quiet stirred now with urgency. She wanted to step into his world fully, to let him see her eyes not from the shimmer of wind or the flicker of water, but from inches away. She wanted to feel his hands against her skin, her true skin, not the abstraction of earth and river. She wanted to hear him say her name, not as a distant legend, but as a whisper shared between hearts. Yet the fear lingered. If she revealed herself, he might kneel instead of hold her. He might worship instead of understand. He might adore the goddess while neglecting the woman. And Aidan feared something too, a fear woven with desire. The closer he felt to the unseen presence, the more he sensed the vastness of it. At times he felt small, overwhelmed, filled with an ache that frightened him through its intensity. What if stepping toward this presence meant losing himself? What if the warmth he felt was only a fraction of a power that could consume him entirely? And thus the core tension consumed them. Her desire to be touched as a woman, his desire to touch, yet fear of the divine. Fiacre's desire to protect her and the threat of losing her to a mortal flame. Their story's heartbeat became a slow, sensual burn, a dance of approach and retreat, and the desire only grew.
Ériu sensed the moment coming, like a tide she could no longer resist. A rising swell of emotion and longing that pressed against the boundaries she had held for centuries. The land trembled softly beneath her, as if her very essence vibrated with anticipation.
Every whisper of wind, every pulse of earth, every shimmer of moonlight felt charged with the same electric ache building inside her. She had spent lifetimes holding herself back, allowing only hints of her presence to brush against mortal hearts. But now, the pull toward Aiden had grown too potent, too undeniable, too necessary. Her longing pressed against her like a warm hand in the darkness, urging her forward, urging her to risk everything. Aiden stood at the crest of a hill where the night wrapped itself around him like a silken shroud, the sky above blooming with stars that seemed impossibly close. He felt the air change around him, thickening, warming, carrying a softness that reached beneath his ribs and curled around his breath. His heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and fear, as if he were standing at the edge of a cliff and the wind whispered both danger and invitation. The presence he had felt for countless nights grew so near that his skin tingled. He inhaled slowly, trying to steady himself, but the air slid into his lungs like a warm sigh along his spine. And then Ériu stepped into form. Not from mist, not from light, not from any familiar transformation. She rose from the land itself, lifted by the breath of soil and starlight. Her body shimmered like dew over soft moss, luminous yet grounded. Her hair flowed in dark waves, alive with the memory of rivers. And her eyes, those shifting shades of green, held more vulnerability than any goddess had ever dared show. When her feet touched the earth, the ground glowed faintly beneath them, recognizing her, embracing her. Aiden's breath left him. For a moment he could not move. She was overwhelming in a way that had nothing to do with divinity, and everything to do with intimacy. She was not a towering figure radiating power. She was a woman whose presence felt like a warm hand placed over his heart, quiet, tender, irresistible.
Ériu stood before him with her pulse trembling in her throat. Her voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. Aiden.
His name on her lips carried centuries of longing. It felt like being touched without contact, like a promise unfurling inside his chest. He swallowed, unable to find words. The fear that had followed him for weeks rose again. Not fear of her power, but fear of wanting her so deeply that it shook the foundations of his soul. You... He struggled to speak. You're real. Her lips curved, soft and trembling. More real now than I have allowed myself to be in ages. The wind stilled around them, as if holding its breath. Aiden stepped forward, drawn by something stronger than thought. Ériu's eyes flickered with vulnerability, but she did not move away. Instead, she let her essence open like a flower yielding to sunlight. The night deepened around them, shadows thickening into a cocoon that sheltered their meeting from the watching world. She slowly lifted her hand, and the movement sent a ripple of energy through the earth. Aiden hesitated. Her fingers glowed faintly with the warmth of ancient soil, as if the heartbeat of the land pulsed just beneath her skin. But desire moved him. He reached out, their fingertips meeting with the softest contact. The world shifted. The moment their skin touched, the boundary between goddess and mortal dissolved. Aiden felt warmth surge through him, not scorching or blinding, but enveloping, like stepping into sunlight after a lifetime of cold. The sensation traveled through every nerve, gentle yet powerful, awakening parts of him he never knew existed. He felt her loneliness, her longing, her centuries of silence, her hope and hesitation, her need to be held as something more than land and legend. Ériu gasped softly. For the first time, a mortal touched not her divine form, but her heart. The intimacy was so raw it blurred her vision. She felt his wonder, his fear, his yearning, felt it like a wave breaking over her, warm and devastating. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes, glistening like dew. Her voice trembled. "You feel me?" "I do," Aiden whispered, stepping closer. "I feel everything." Their hands slid together fully, and the earth responded. Grass swayed though no wind touched it. The soil beneath them pulsed gently, like the heartbeat of a living world, keeping time with their breath. Ériu let herself lean into him, her body soft and warm, her essence wrapping around him like moonlit water. Aiden placed his other hand against her cheek. Her skin was cool like river stone, yet warmed instantly under his touch. The moment deepened.
Ériu released a shuddering breath, and her form flickered, not fading, but expanding. A glow emanated from her chest, subtle yet profound. Her true essence surged outward in a way she had never allowed another to witness. Aiden saw valleys and rivers and forests within her, felt the swell of tides and the whisper of seasons passing through her. She wasn't just a goddess, she was the soul of the land itself, limitless and fragile in the same breath. The exposure left her trembling. "This is me," she whispered, voice cracking with vulnerability. "All of me, not as a symbol, not as a legend, but as a soul who longs." Aiden cupped her face gently, awe softening into tenderness. "Ériu, you're beautiful." Her breath hitched. No worship, no kneeling, just connection, just truth. She leaned forward, their foreheads touching. The contact was small, but it felt like a merging. The ground beneath them glowed softly, luminous like embers pressed into the earth. Aiden exhaled, breath mingling with hers. She inhaled his warmth as though drawing life from him. Their spirits brushed. Ériu felt herself unravel, softly, willingly, into him. Aiden felt himself open to her, fear dissolving into desire. In that instant, they shared something deeper than flesh, deeper than words. Her essence flowed into his heart, filling the empty spaces he had carried for years. His warmth flowed into her, soothing the ancient ache that had lived inside her for ages. It was not a kiss, not yet, but it was more intimate than any kiss. It was the meeting of souls stripped bare. A soft sound broke the moment, half sigh, half moan, from Ériu's lips. Aiden pulled her closer instinctively, his arms wrapping around her as if holding something precious and breakable. She melted against him, her body fitting against his with the ease of something destined. The earth brightened beneath them, threads of golden light weaving through the soil like veins of molten life. Trees swayed though the air was still. Water shimmered in unseen streams. The entire land seemed to breathe with them, echoing their union. Finally, Ériu lifted her head, meeting his gaze with eyes shining. "Ériu," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion,
I am yours in this moment, if you are brave enough to be mine. Aiden's answer came not as words, but as a soft kiss to her lips, gentle, reverent, filled with every quiet longing he had ever carried. It was a touch that felt like destiny unfolding, and the land glowed brighter still. She felt the shift before she fully understood it, the subtle loosening of the world's breath, the quiet rearrangement of the winds, the deep settling of the earth beneath her bare feet. Ériu stood at the edge of herself, neither holy goddess nor holy woman, but something suspended between the two, trembling in the aftermath of all she had revealed. The air still hummed with the remnants of their union, with the echo of the moment when she had opened every hidden corridor of her being and allowed him to walk through without restriction. And now, in the hush that followed, she faced the truth of what had changed. Nothing returned to what it had been. Not the land, not her body, not the pulse of Ireland itself. The soil was warm beneath her, holding memories of touch, as though it had absorbed the imprint of their shared breath. The grasses around her moved like a body still exhaling, soft and heavy with the imprint of intimacy. Even the rivers nearby ran fuller, as though stirred from a long sleep. This was the cost and the gift of being Ériu. Her emotions were not her own, not entirely. They shaped mountains, shifted tides, colored the world itself. And now, after the climax of desire and revelation, the land carried a new resonance, something deeper, something undeniably altered. Her counterpart stood near her, not touching her yet, as though the slightest contact would shatter the delicate state in which the world currently existed. He had seen her, not the goddess crowned in sovereignty, nor the symbol of a people, nor the vast, timeless spirit of the land. He had seen the woman beneath all of that, the one who longed, who ached, who feared, who needed, the one who opened for him like dawn breaking over the hills. He had not expected the tenderness that struck him now. It balanced on the threshold of fear and reverence, leaving him breathless. She could feel it rolling off him, a tide of emotion that mingled with her own lingering tremors. And for a moment, Ériu wondered whether this encounter had changed him even more than it had changed her. Ériu, he whispered, her name like a prayer spoken into a quiet temple. What happens now? The question seemed simple, but in it lay 1,000 unspoken fears. Would she withdraw into her divine distance again? Would she sever what they had created? Would she claim him, bind him, or let him drift back into mortality unchanged? Or would their encounter carve something permanent into destiny? She turned toward him slowly, each movement deliberate, as if signaling the gravity of this moment. Her hair still carried the shimmer of the earlier storm of feeling, and her eyes, those deep, green, ancient eyes, held warmth rather than the unreachable depth of sovereignty. When she spoke, her voice had softened, though its echoes still carried the weight of hills and the breath of the sea. "What happens now," she said, "is transformation." The word felt like a seed planted in the quiet loam between them. He swallowed. "For me?" or for you. For both, she answered. For the land, for everything that breathes beneath these skies. She approached him, her steps silent but resonant, each one sending ripples through the grass as though the earth leaned eagerly toward her. When she stood close enough to touch him, she did not. Instead, she lifted her hand and let it hover near his chest, feeling the residual echo of their joined spirits still trembling beneath his skin. He felt it too, the warmth, the tremor, the truth that their souls, once interwoven, could never fully separate again. She saw me, she said softly, almost in awe. Not the goddess draped in myths, not the land that people claim and name. You saw me. And I do still, he replied, his voice nearly breaking with devotion. She smiled then, tired, tender, radiant. And I have seen you, not as a supplicant, not as a wanderer seeking blessings, but as a heart capable of holding mine, even for a moment. A breeze passed gently over them, not cold, not warm, simply present, as though listening. He took a breath, the weight of destiny settling onto his shoulders. Will I lose you now? Now that the moment has passed? Ériu's expression grew both sorrowful and profound. You cannot lose what has entered you, she whispered. What I gave you does not fade. It roots itself in you as deeply as an oak roots in the soil. But understand this, no mortal can hold me entirely. I am too vast, too old, too woven into the bones of this island. His heart constricted. But I do not want ownership. I want closeness, even if it means pain. It will mean pain, Ériu said. All unions with the divine do, but they also mean illumination. He closed his eyes briefly, absorbing her words with a mixture of fear and acceptance. She stepped closer, this time pressing her forehead to his. Their breaths mingled, slow and fragile. She let him feel her, not the overwhelming force of her climax, but the quieter truth that lingered beneath it. The truth that she had chosen him, even for this fleeting crossing of lives. When you return to your world, she murmured, you will carry pieces of me, the longing, the wildness, the memory of my touch. These will guide you, haunt you, strengthen you. They will make you more than you were. And you? He asked, his voice trembling against her lips. Her breath shivered softly as she answered, I will carry the echo of your courage, your gentleness, your willingness to stand before me unshielded. That is rare, precious. It will shape me too. He opened his eyes then, meeting her gaze directly. In that moment, he saw not a goddess, but a soul who had risked vulnerability for him. A soul who would forever feel his presence in the rustle of grass, in the warmth of the soil, in the storm-lit skies. Then our separation, it is not an ending? He whispered. No. Ériu whispered back. It is a beginning made of distance, a bond stretched across realms, a connection that breathes, not dissolves. The land around them shifted again, a gentle reminder that time, even sacred time, continued. Ériu stepped back, not withdrawing affection, but offering release. Her form grew subtly brighter, as though light seeped from her skin. The earth beneath her feet pulsed, once, twice, in quiet farewell. You must walk forward. Your life awaits you, altered. You will know what to do when the time comes. And you? He asked. I remain, she said simply, but not unchanged. He felt the truth resound through the ground itself. She extended her hand. When he took it, the warmth of her palm was both blessing and goodbye. A soft glow enveloped him, not blinding, but soothing, until the world shifted and he found himself standing alone on a familiar path, except nothing felt familiar anymore. And in the wind that brushed his cheek, he felt her whisper, "You belong to the land now, as it once belonged to me." And Ériu, standing unseen at the edge of the horizon, felt a rare ache settled in her chest, an ache she welcomed because it proved that for one brief, sacred moment she had been seen, touched, and changed. The outcome was not union nor loss. It was transformation, a lingering ache that both nourished and unsettled, a bond that neither time nor realm could fully sever. And in that ache, the myth continued to breathe.
The air settles differently after a story such as Ériu's, softer, slower, carrying the impression of something sacred that has only just withdrawn its hand from the world. In the hush that follows her tale, the land itself seems to breathe with new meaning. Hills cradle silence like a memory. Rivers carry whispers that are not entirely water. And the wind, drifting through valleys and over cliffs, carries a tenderness not always present before. It is here, in this lingering quiet, that the reflection begins, not as an ending, but as a return to the heartbeat beneath everything. For Ériu is not only a figure from myth, she is an idea, a sensation, an ache made eternal. She is the embodiment of what it means to long, for connection, for understanding, for a touch that sees beyond surface and crown. Her myth, when stripped to its deepest truth, is a meditation on desire's power to reshape the self and the land alike. To tell her story is to acknowledge the intimate weave between spirit and soil, between the mortal who walks upon the land and the divine presence that inhabits it. As her narrative recedes like a tide pulling back from the shore, what remains is the resonance of her longing, a longing that belongs not only to her, but to anyone who has ever wished to be truly seen. In Ériu's yearning, we find fragments of our own, the desire to be touched not merely for our roles or our strength or our legend, but for the fragile, trembling truth beneath.
we recognize the courage it takes to open oneself, the quiet fear of revealing tenderness, and the profound transformation that intimacy creates. Her encounter with the mortal is more than a story of sensual union. It is a metaphor for the meeting of realms, human and divine, physical and spiritual, grounded and transcendent. Their connection symbolizes the joining of body and land, breath and horizon. The moment when he sees her not as a goddess but as a soul echoes the first time any human looks at their world with reverence rather than possession. It reminds us that land is not a thing to be taken, but a being to be known. This reflection draws us back to the beginning, to the breath of ancient Ireland, where her presence was first felt as a soft warmth in the soil, a whisper in the grass, a pulse beneath the waves. She was always there, waiting for recognition, waiting for touch. Her story begins and ends with the same truth, that intimacy, when approached with reverence and openness, becomes a sacred act, capable of altering destinies.
The sensuality of Ériu's myth is not mere physicality. It is the sensuality of connection, of spirit brushing against spirit, of longing meeting its reflection in another. It is the sensuality of belonging, of knowing that one's essence is intertwined with something vaster and older than oneself. The mortal who meets her does not simply touch a goddess. He touches the land that raised him, the soil that bears his history, the breath that shapes his dreams. Through her, he understands that desire is not a weakness, but a form of devotion. In the aftermath of her story, one cannot help but feel a soft ache, a bittersweet pull that lingers behind the ribs. It is the ache of a myth that speaks to the oldest parts of the human heart. We crave what the mortal gained, that brief but eternal moment of being held by something immeasurably vast, yet intimately tender. And we crave what Ériu herself sought, the experience of being met where we are most vulnerable, most open, most unguarded. Reflection becomes a bridge between the story told and the world waiting outside of it. It invites the listener to wonder, how do we touch the land we walk upon? How do we honor the unseen spirits that shape our days? How do we allow our own longing to guide us toward transformation rather than fear? Ériu's myth does not offer answers, it offers sensations, glimpses, invitations. It asks us to consider that desire, when rooted in reverence, can lead to revelation. The quiet sensuality woven through her tale is not meant to shock or overwhelm, but to soften the boundaries that separate human from divine. In her story, the body becomes a vessel of meaning, the land becomes a lover, and the soul becomes a trembling, luminous thing reaching for recognition. The reflection recognizes that each touch in the myth, each breath shared, each step taken, each moment of vulnerability carries symbolic weight. To touch Ériu is to touch Ireland itself, and to be touched by her is to be changed by the land that shaped one's destiny. As these ideas drift through the final reflection, one can almost feel Ériu's presence lingering nearby,
watching from the edges of the horizon. She stands not as a distant deity, but as a silent companion to those who dare to feel deeply. Her myth does not end, because myth never truly ends. It continues to seep into the soil, into memory, into the spaces between moments where longing becomes too strong to ignore.
The listener is left with images that pulse softly. The warmth of sunlit grass, the trembling air before a storm, the hush of twilight settling over hills shaped by ancient magic. These images serve as reminders that the world is alive, aware, and responsive. That every path walked is a meeting with Ériu in some small sacred way, and that intimacy, whether with another soul or with the land itself, is a form of worship. In contemplating her story, one is gently guided to recognize that longing is not emptiness, it is direction. It points toward what the heart fears to admit it needs. Ériu teaches that desire, when honored rather than suppressed, can lead to transformation, connection, and a deeper understanding of one's place in the world. Her myth echoes the truth that sovereignty is not dominance, it is the freedom to offer oneself with trust. As this reflection draws to a quiet close, it circles back to the heartbeat that began the myth, the ancient, sensual pulse of Ireland embodied in Ériu's form. Her story ends, yet its essence continues to ripple through the listener's thoughts, like the aftertaste of a dream too vivid to fade quickly. It lingers as a soft heat beneath the skin, a whisper against the ear, a longing that is gentle but insistent. And when the final breath of her reflections settles, what remains is a sense of timelessness, a feeling that Ériu is still near, watching, waiting, longing in her own eternal way. Her myth invites the listener to lean closer, to listen more carefully, to touch the world with reverence. It ends not with closure, but with an opening, a quiet, sensual promise that there are more stories waiting, more desires unfolding, more encounters that will leave the soul trembling. And so, with a last soft exhale from the land itself, the reflection rests, while the desire for the next story begins to stir.